Welcome back to the Intentional Workplace, a podcast where we spend 15 minutes each week to talk about everything HR to improve your business. I'm Jacob Stone,
And I'm Maria Williams.
and this week we're going to be talking about values in theory versus values in reality. To start us off, Maria, how do employees, when company values aren't truly lived day to day, how do employees know when that's occurring?
Yeah, one thing that I'll just start off with is that employees are watching what's happening in the organization. And we talked a little bit about this last week, kind of the things that employees at a company notice, and things that happen every day. This is another one of those. So one thing here is that employees watch what's getting rewarded at a company. So one way to think about this is rewards and recognition and what types of values or behaviors are getting rewarded on a regular basis. So a couple of examples here, that I have. One is collaboration is often a value that I see many companies have, the value of teamwork and collaboration and team building and that sort of thing. And one thing that often is inconsistent with that at companies is if they reward or recognize individual performance and individual contribution. So if it's a company that says, we value collaboration, everybody needs to collaborate, teamwork, all of that. And then during the all hands meetings or any kind of forum where there's any sort of recognition, it's only that individual kind of recognition that's called out. Another thing that I see often here that's kind of a inconsistency is accountability. Accountability is a really common value and an important one that many organizations have. And they want their teams to exhibit accountability and be accountable for their actions. But when leaders aren't stepping up and kind of admitting their mistakes openly and holding themselves accountable and being kind of transparent about that, that's evident too. It's sort of like, if you're an employee at a company and it's accountability, but you're not seeing that accountability at the top, that's something that's noticeable.
Sure. And I guess too for listeners that are maybe either new or scaling up their teams and really trying to establish that culture, what are things that you've seen in the past that when you see the writing on the wall, you know that, okay, this is the direction we want to go to as far as our values, as far as our culture. This is our expectation, but we're definitely not hitting that. And you can recognize it. What are some things that I guess on both sides of the aisle that both the owners or managers or leadership can do, as well as employees and individual contributors? What can they do to help change that?
Yeah, one thing is consistency in terms of where these values are being displayed and talked about. So one thing is kind of, are these values being referenced in the hiring process and the recruiting process, in the onboarding process? Are they being referenced in team meetings, in all hands kind of company meetings? Are they being referenced in tough conversations that are happening? And that's something we'll talk about in another episode. But I guess, let me frame this a little bit differently. I mean, one thing that leaders and just companies, everybody that works, in an organization can focus on is that consistency in the values. And it's not just something that you hang up on the wall and you don't talk about. Like, it needs to be lived every day. So that's one thing that, that I can think of. Another thing, kind of just on the leadership standpoint, a leadership perspective, is be really cognizant about how you're coming across in conversations, in meetings that you have with your leadership team or the whole company, and really try to focus on one or two of those company values and be intentional about how you're talking about it. So I talked about accountability, and people notice if mistakes aren't, leaders aren't being held accountable themselves. Be open about the mistakes maybe that came out. If a value is transparency, this is another thing. Like, in these team meetings, do as much as you can to be open and transparent So just be intentional about like living these values day to day and being consistent with that.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that sentiment, um, the other part of values, other than the cultural part, what I always think of is the process, how things are getting done. I think that's greatly overlooked, um, whether it be small organizations, especially within larger organizations. A lot of times when you're hiring somebody or you're establishing whatever this culture is for this product or this service, we have this mindset of we're the best, we grind, we rise and grind, we, hit the ground running and we get the job done. But a lot of times you overlook, how are we getting that job done? How are we getting from point A to point B? And what is all that bottleneck issues that we're trying to overcome and road humps that we're trying to get overcome in that process? Which if you don't have that process, then your employees get frustrated, you get frustrated, stakeholders are breathing down your neck. And so your values then change because then it turns into a blame game and everyone's on edge. So I think if everyone takes a step back and you establish whatever the process is, whether it be HR processes, sales processes, marketing, whatever that might be, if you take a ready, aim, shoot kind of a method rather than ready, shoot, aim, and just hope for the best, I think that you'll see that your culture and dynamic of everything that you've just mentioned will fall into line, will fall into place.
Yes, I love the point around process. I agree with that, and I think I've seen one another common value that I've seen a lot is the like act with urgency or
Right.
something around that as a value. And often it's, the biggest focus there is, and this obviously depends on the type of company and industry and all that, but a lot of time the focus there is in dealing with customers. So act with urgency, sense of urgency, and dealing with customers. But from a process standpoint, like you mentioned, if the processes aren't set up internally to like live that value internally, and there's a lot of bottlenecks, there's a lot of duplication of processes, there's tools that aren't working, then this sense of urgency isn't easy to live within the company, and you're kind of contradicting how you handle things internally, with how you're kind of handling customers too. So really taking a close look at that is important in the processes. That's a great point. I love that.
Yeah, and a loaded term I always hear, especially in the recruiting process or hiring, would be self-starters. We want
Mhm.
self-starters. We need people that can work autonomously but collaboratively. And I feel like that self-starter term, um, it's gotten it's overused because if you don't have a process, what does that mean? A self-start. You want me to figure everything out? Like you want me to come in here and just change the landscape because I can, but then you're going to run into some other issues. Are you paying me enough to do that? Is this what that job does? Is it going to be taking away from other things that I'm going to be doing? So again, with what you were saying, that whole self-starting, um, we want someone that's going to come in there and be collaborative at the same time. And if you don't have the process and you don't have, um, I would say, the play-by-play operations or even the key positions that are filled to even run that process or establish that operation, your values go way out the window or they just change because what you want to have happen or what you're thinking is happening is complete opposite. We've all
Yeah.
been in those positions where managers are thinking one thing, and you're, yeah, 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 okay, we'll get that done. They leave the room, and you guys are in the break room going, "Oh my god, John Smith, what a schmo he was. Like, why does he think that I can do this? Or I guess he's not going to do that." And it
Yeah.
comes down that there's no process for it. You're
Yeah.
saying, "Give me this task or whatever it is, and just go." But you don't really, and you got to be a self starter and figure it out. Well, okay, that's going to be taking away from X, Y, and Z. So you have to understand that. And so our values change.
Yeah.
So I think that was a good point that you had brought up, certainly.
Yeah, and that ties into our, episode on the hiring for skill versus
Yes.
potential.
Ooh, good
Um,
callback. Good
yes, a
callback,
lot of
Maria.
these are kind of intertwined.
Are
So
you saying HR stacks on itself? Because
I know. But that's a great, yeah, like, you can't, assume somebody's going to be a self-starter and kind of exhibit these values and all that if you don't have the right support structure in place and the right tools and the right, there's so many more things that go along with that, when it
yeah.
comes to the values, so.
So then moving that forward, because again, we've talked about recognizing it, or how, how does it change the values of a company? What's one behavior that leaders can change to turn values into action? So we've recognized, like we had mentioned, that these are some of the issues that we're running into. We see what we want to be and what we're not, and what we've preached, but we're not practicing what we preach. What are some things that, and they don't have to be anything big, I wouldn't think, but what are some things that leadership can do themselves that they can help implement that'll really put their vision, their integrity, their values into action?
Yeah, I mentioned before kind of the just being intentional about communication and the way that leaders show up and making sure that they're walking the talk. Is that the way, right way to say it?
Yeah.
And really exhibiting those values day to day and thinking about them day to day and not just something that's kind of in the back of their head. But another thing that's more tangible is for companies that have some kind of performance, annual or more frequently kind of performance evaluation in place, making sure that the behaviors or the values of the company are part of that, and are kind of part of the regular conversations that managers have with their employees, so that you're not just as a company evaluating on what the person gets done on a day to day and are they meeting their business goals, but are they showing up every day exhibiting these company values and making that a hard, a part of the evaluation and kind of a metric that's used. And I think even if it's a company that doesn't have a formal kind of performance cadence in place, it's empowering or enabling the managers to kind of have these conversations when it comes to feedback, when it comes to talking about the careers of their teams and weaving in, the values to the goals for that particular role. I think that's something that's easy to implement, and it really makes these values more sticky and tangible for the whole organization.
Yeah, and I'm gonna even go even granular with it. I think that while you need to have those conversations, because, and it's been a reoccurring theme, if you've noticed, that conversation with your employees is paramount. Like, if you have to have a clear path to communicate, in a safe, I say a safe space where where it's constructive. I would even go as far back as saying leaders need to do a lot of introspection. You should constantly be looking inside yourself. How can I make this place better? How can I make my employees better? How can I improve the situation? Whatever that might be. And if you do that, I think the conversations will start themselves, because instead of, we have a tendency as leaders to point, well, I'm the director and I want you to do this and do that. And I know everything and blah, blah, blah. When a lot of times it's, wait a minute, let me take a step back for a second. What's going, because there's a disconnect somewhere. So what is it that I'm wanting to convey that I'm not able to do? And how can I express it appropriately, respectfully, and move everything in the direction that we need to move?
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, when you communicate, you have to know what it is that you want to communicate and recognize what the issues are, even if it's with yourself. And
Yes.
it always starts from the top. I'm a firm believer with that, that it starts from the top. You set the tone. And so for you to get your values across, to keep your integrity, to set the culture, leaders need to do constant introspection. I mean, almost every day you should take at
Mhm.
least 10, 15 minutes going, what did I do today that I could have done better, or that maybe I didn't do as well, or that I did do really well and I want to continue building on that.
Yeah.
I think that that's a healthy trait for any leader at any business at any level to do.
Yes, absolutely. Well, great conversation today. And
We could talk 100 years about this, right?
we absolutely can. And guaranteed at future episodes, this will be, part of the dialogue too. So thanks
Absolutely.
for joining us. And next week, we'll be talking about the hidden cost of avoiding hard conversations, which is a really important topic. So join us next week for that conversation.
All right. See you
All right.
guys next week.
Thank you. Bye.